Welcome to Off Watch, our weekly interview series. This episode's guest was Annie Lush, a two-time match racing world champion, an Olympian, and twice a competitor in the ocean race. Now, the interview was recorded back at the beginning of May with Annie under lockdown in Spain, but she took the time to talk us through moving from Olympics into killboats and offshore, sailing with Team Brunel in the last edition and that injury in the Southern Ocean, plus her insights into the IMOCA 60 and what we can expect in the next edition. If you enjoy this interview, subscribe for more, leave us a like, and in the comments below, you can always leave us a suggestion as to who you want us to talk to next. Enjoy. Olympian Annie Lush has competed in two editions of the ocean race. First with Team SCA back in 2014-15, then with Team Brunel in the 2017-18 edition. In the first, she earned her stripes, not least with a leg win into Lisbon. On the second, her sailing was cut short after a nasty rogue wave washed her off her feet and smashed her on the deck. Now, having to cheer her teammates on from the sidelines wasn't the position that she wanted to be in, but Annie can be just as influential ashore as she can be on the water. Now, here's where the Magenta project comes in, pushing young female sailors up to the front lines of sailings and getting them onto the boats for the future. She is one to watch, and she is one that the future teams call when they need a sailor who knows how to build a good, strong team. Annie, thank you for talking to me. There's a lot about your sailing that I want to get into, and I know that you're the person to talk to about the IMOCA 60s, what we can expect in terms of some of the performance, and I'm going to get to that, but I know how many young sailors there are in Britain, at the very least, who come to you for advice and a little bit of guidance about where to go. When people talk to you about the ocean race and what they might be able, what they might have to do to get to that start line, what's the key part, that key personality trait or skill that you are constantly having to bring up?
Well, that's the $1 million question then. I think, you need a lot of different skills, but it's definitely to do with a personality trait fundamentally. And I would say resilience is the biggest thing. Probably an overused word, but applies in Olympic campaigns and ocean races. But yeah, certainly in the Volvo ocean race. And as an example, I remember with Team SCA, we sort of didn't really know where we were going to stand in the race. We, at the beginning, certainly weren't winning. And I just remember our coaches saying, you just got to keep going in this race. Crazy things will happen. And I mean, they did. Competitors got taken out by running into islands and losing masts, and and we got better. But yeah, you just got to keep going, because it doesn't really matter where you start, it's where you finish.
Was that what was trying to be constructed with that team? Because I'm wondering about those training camps in Lanzarote with Team SCA. I mean, you guys started with such a direction, or at least that's what it looked like from the outside. What were those first few months of, let's get ready to take this challenge on? What was that like?
I mean, for me, it was a really exciting start. The actual start of the trials for me was in Southampton, and I stepped on board Puma with the Volvo 70, which SCA had bought as our training boat because it was before the 65s had been built. And we set out of the Solent, on a Volvo 70. It was like a dream come true just after the 2012 Olympics. And within about 5 minutes, I was completely converted to offshore sailing. And it was really an exciting few months. There was obviously, the trials went on a long time. There were a lot of girls trying. There was a lot of competition. But personally, I've pretty much spent my life trialing. I mean, through all my Olympic campaigns before that, for the boat race, even as a rower. So kind of being watched every day and coached and trialing is sort of part of every day. So I loved it.
I mean, going to sail on a 70 as well, that's a pretty good start, because obviously the 65s, they've proved themselves. Two editions, certainly in the last edition, they delivered on terms of the performance. But what was it like going from a Yingling, which is the boat that probably outside the ocean race, or certainly before the ocean race, you were very well known for in terms of all your Olympic sailing and all your campaigns. So we go from the Yingling. It's a slower boat. I mean, it's a tough boat to sail, but it's a slower boat. Then you jump on board the 70. Was there a moment where you had to sort of, hang on as that first sail was trimmed on?
Yeah, well, I think we sailed out of the Solent on, like a J4 and a reefed main, going about 14 and a half knots. And I thought that the world was on fire. Like, this was the coolest thing ever, because 8 knots down a surfing wave and in England was pretty much where I'd been at before that. Little did I know that we were going to be averaging, over 27 knots in the race. So it was incredible. But I remember as we were finishing that sort of first trial or training one, we were sailing from Southampton to Lanzarote, where we were going to be training with Team SCA for a year, more than a year after that. And we were allowed to do everything on board. It was a fantastic experience. We're driving at night, and for me, it was just like watching orange numbers dancing around, not really sure what I was doing, and realizing how hard it was to sail the boat fast consistently. And then as we came into Lanzarote, and it's quite a shifty breeze coming over the land, Magnus was driving, and I remember just watching the numbers, and it's like someone had fixed them still. His apparent wind angle didn't move, his true wind angle didn't move, and even though the wind was going up and down. And I remember one of the other trialists looking over at me, and she was like, "We've got a long way to go."
What was the classic mistake that surely you must have made in the beginning? I mean, I'm always used to seeing dinghy sailors go onto offshore boats and burn themselves out in the first 20 minutes. Were you a culprit of that?
I think all the girls will tell you was my choice of dressing. I think it was, 5 minutes into setting off the Solent, I'd lost a glove. And then 10 minutes later, I probably lost my hat and I'm already drenched, and thinking this wasn't really a big problem. But, you soon learn that get wet 5 minutes into a 28-day leg, and that's not good news.
You guys trained so hard, and as you said, you spent a year in Lanzarote. I'm sure you kind of lived and breathed it. I'm wondering whether there was almost a danger that it was almost like too long. I mean, you must have been chomping at the bit to actually get to the start line, get on the race and perform, or, compare yourself to some people.
I don't think you can prepare for too long. It's all in the preparation. But for sure, the fact with the 65s that you weren't allowed to line up against anyone else was a real hindrance for us, because when we turned up in Alicante, I remember arriving, doing the delivery into Alicante, and just seeing the other boats, and we just didn't really know any of the other teams. In the Olympics, I'm used to lining up against people that I've raced hundreds and thousands of times, probably by the end of my career. And here we are turning up in a race where we just didn't really know anyone. I knew Ian Walker because he'd coached me for some Olympic sailing before, but beyond that, these were just a whole different sort of breed of sailors to me. And we were going to have to line up against them in our first race. And that was such a sort of weird thing to do.
Excuse me if I get this wrong. I mean, you're in it, so you know how it is. But from where I see the race, I just see it very normal now to have both genders represented on the teams and on the racetrack. But of course, back then with Team SCA, you were an all-female team, and that was only the second one in the race's history. Was there any sort of... was there a missed beat with any of the teams in terms of welcoming you? Did some go a little further, go out of their way? Or was it just, you're a sailor, I'm a sailor, let's race?
I think with Team SCA, it was just that we weren't known. And I don't know if it's such a gender thing as just, we just weren't experienced. We had a few girls on board that had been part of AMA-Sport too, but that was 12 years ago before, the time we started Team SCA. So long time ago. And other than that, we hadn't been in the race. So it was just like turning up as the new kids on the block. No one knew us. And also, we didn't really know each other before we'd started building as Team SCA. We came from very different backgrounds. We had to, because no one had the perfect experience. So we had single-handed offshore sailors, Olympic sailors, match racers. Some people had done some crude offshore sailing before. It was such a mishmash of sailors. So it wasn't, we just sort of weren't known. And then, of course, you get into the ocean race village these days and you realise that half these guys that are competing against each other in this race were actually sailing with each other around the world the race before that, and against each other the race before that. And there's such a history. People do this race over and over and over again. So we just weren't really part of that club.
And of course, this is your first edition. This is it. So you've spent all this time training. I mean, it's impossible to underplay Team SCA owned Alicante. I mean, it was incredible when you went to Alicante. All it was Team SCA banners, everything. It was amazing. I'm sure you felt that pressure on your shoulders, or was it sort of, to use a bad pun, wind in the sails?
I think the pressure was definitely there. I mean, I don't think it was so much by the presence that SCA had. I mean, that was fantastic, I think. And actually that did help us in the end, and the amount of support we had, and just an incredible shore crew and team behind us. And I think if you look back now, I think all of the girls would say it was such a privilege to be involved in that campaign because of the amount of support we had. But we did feel an immense pressure. I think as the race went on, more and more a pressure to perform, because it wasn't just about us doing well in that race to prove how good we were. It was kind of like, if we mess this up, there might not be any women in this race ever again, and this is the moment that we could change that. And I remember really feeling that pressure, and in one leg actually in particular, where I really felt we needed to be performing by then, and we still hadn't got a result on the board, and just feeling that we were letting down all the other female sailors out there, basically.
What happened then with the leg win? How did that affect you?
Yeah, I think personally for me, that the leg before the leg win, I wasn't on board. I'd got really sick in, I think it was leg 6, and then I couldn't do the transatlantic, and I wasn't on board for that leg. I think I'd also just, a bit like you said, as an Olympic sailor, I think I'd approach the race kind of like a load of Olympic races joined together. And after the Southern Ocean, I'd pretty much broken myself. But anyway, I had that leg off before we arrived into Lisbon. And I remember finally sort of watching a lot of the video and listening to all the feedback, and just realizing how far we had come. I know that certainly personally, when I rejoined in Lisbon, ready for that leg, I felt like, oh no, actually, I'm looking at all the guys' teams. They all look tired. They've changed a lot of the crew. We haven't changed anybody. We're still the same team. We've stayed together, and I could see a lot of strengths that we had. So I think we started that leg in a slightly different mindset. We decided to just play to our strengths rather than worry about our weaknesses, and it worked.
So you conclude that edition with the leg win, and I'm sure just bucket loads of experience and sort of lessons learned. Then we go into the next edition of the race, where the rules change and it incentivizes mixed teams. How do you line up on board Team Brunel? Were you digging for that option, or did it come to you?
I think as all sailors know, and if I was going to give any advice to any young sailors, it doesn't just come to you. You have to work at these options. Yeah, for sure. After Team SCA, we all wanted to do the race again. I mean, ideally, I think continue as we were, but unfortunately, something else happened internally with the sponsor, and that wasn't an option, because just as that race was finishing, we felt ready to launch. We'd got that experience, and we kind of knew what we were doing, and we were excited to go again. Yeah. So it was very disappointing when we couldn't stay together. But then, of course, the new rule came in, and we working with the race with the Magenta project, and excited to bring in new girls as well. But yeah, I approached Bouwe Bekking. To be honest, it was partly because I knew that he hadn't been a great fan of Team SCA, and he'd sort of said openly when they brought in the new rule that he didn't think he was going to sail with any girls on board.
I remember that.
I suppose for me that was a little bit like a red flag to a bull. And I phoned him and said, could I come sailing with him, and he could see what he thought.
And what happened? You step on board, and like you say, I'm almost wondering whether you're back into that mindset of, if I get this right, I change your opinion for the benefit of not just myself, but for a lot of sailors after me as well.
I think, we started the campaign. We were very late And we had a few new sailors as well into the race. I mean, very good sailors, but very new to offshore.
Yeah, well, like you say, so a couple of new sailors, a couple of little sailors from America's Cup. I think they just come from a bit of a win down there, didn't they?
Yeah, so we had 3 cup sailors, and actually, well, 2 from Team New Zealand, Carlos and Pete Burling, and so Carlo grinder on Team New Zealand before, and obviously Pete Burling helming, and then we had Carl Langford, who'd just lost to them, but you know, none of those guys really have that much offshore experience, certainly not sort of ocean race experience. And yeah, we had to build a team, and it was great, to be honest. Bouwe was pretty open from the beginning, and for me it was get to sail with the most experienced person in the race. That was really the goal, because the thing we lacked on Team SCA, and I always felt this, it's not that we didn't have any guys, it's just that we didn't have any experience, and not having any guys meant we didn't have any experience because there hadn't been women in the race. So suddenly I get to sail with Bouwe and KP, who, 7 and 8 races each or whatever, they'd done an incredible amount of laps. So just getting to sail with people of that experience was a real opportunity.
That boat just looks like a who's who of, your fantasy draft of sailors from various different disciplines, maybe not, all the offshore experience, but, the stories and all the rest of it that must have been sort of shared about what was going on behind the curtains of the Cup and previous editions. I won't put you on the spot to get any of those, but I'm sure there were some good rail conversations. But unfortunately, you guys don't come out of the blocks firing. I mean, that first leg, I think it was pretty tight. It was like 6 minutes or something like that, but you are at the back of the fleet. Again, was that something that was being discussed as a team, that first few legs we're going to have to learn our way, or did it come as a shock?
I think we knew we were late into the preparation. I mean, really late, and it wasn't sort of your ideal lead up to the race at all. But I think that probably the first couple of legs were a shock, because we'd done some preliminary races before that, and we had been doing quite well in those, given what the equipment we've been sailing with. So I don't know if shock is the right word. We knew we had to work hard, but it was disappointing. Yeah.
And then you made some changes with, I think it was your dagger boards. I'm presumably leaving no stone unturned. It's a one design boat, the VO65. What was it like for people like Burling on board, used to the design, used to that foil's not working, we'll change it, that sail's not working, we'll change it? Was it did you feel like, did they feel like their options were limited to try and find speed, or was it more, it's one design, our equipment's the same as theirs, so the speed's got to be in here somewhere?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for Pete, yes, he comes from the Cup, but also he comes from Olympic sailing, and the 49er is, one design as well, perhaps different to the 65, but the same idea. And so, no, I think they understood the rules, but it was certainly with Pete, you could just tell he was always thinking about tiny details to make a difference, how we could stack something differently, how we could move something differently to just try and, it's all those tiny pieces. The more one design is, you have to pay attention to every single little detail to try and get that speed edge.
And then we come to leg 3, which is obviously back into the Southern Ocean. And it was tough on you. We'll come to the injury in just a second. When you went into the Southern Ocean on that time, did you, presumably, you're in good shape, you're in good spirits, this is not your first time down there. Or were you in any way tired? Was there a chink in the armour?
I think when we set off from Cape Town, we were still establishing as a team, for sure. But no, I was excited to go back into Southern Ocean again. Louis Balkan had just joined the team as well. I mean, he was always planned to come in, but that was when he was coming in, and I was really excited to be sailing with him, because I'd been friends with him through the race before, got to know him in the 14-15 edition, and I knew he was a fantastic sailor, so it was great to be on deck with him. And yeah, I also, we were showing good performance at the beginning of that leg, so I felt like, here we go.
And then, of course, you get taken out by a wave. Well, I mean, that's as far as I know about it. What was happening? Where were you? And yeah, how did it kind of unravel, I guess?
Yeah, we were driving for the ice skates, and we were setting up to drive. So the ice skates is sort of not obviously an actual gate, but coordinates that the race give us to keep us safe from the icebergs. And we were approaching that zone. So we were setting up to jibe. I was on deck, and I'd gone to set up the pit for the jibe and then come back to grind on the aft pedestal. And I was tethered on, but on quite a long tether, I suppose. And yeah, just got hit by a wave, and we were getting hit by waves all the time, but must have not been hanging on hard enough. And I got shot to the back of the boat, and I sort of felt myself get washed into the guard wires at the back. And as I landed, I've had quite a lot of injuries now in my career, and I hadn't really felt something quite like that before. So I knew it probably wasn't that good.
Because you've taken knocks before, and I'm sure you've been swept off your feet before by waves. As you say, you were a rower, and I mean, as anyone that's seen the training regime for a rower will know, it's pretty tough. So it was an instant reaction that you thought, this one's going to be a little bit more than just a bruise.
Yeah, I think as I did it, I felt this very strange pain going up my back and down my leg, and the problem was I was now to leeward, and obviously more and more waves are still crashing, and the guys are trying to slow down, but there's only so much slowing down you can do in the Southern Ocean when you're hooning downwind with a lot of sail up. And there's only a few of us on deck. Everyone else is about to come up to jibe, but they're not up yet, so it takes a while to actually slow down. So I was still being hit by more waves, and I remember sort of Abby was screaming at me like, get up, because I needed to get up on the high side to get out of being pounded by more waves. But I realized I just I couldn't stand up. My leg just sort of wouldn't let me.
Did they have to help you through? Because I mean, the next thing that I know is that you're obviously confined to your bunk. How did you get from basically in the lion's den with the waves coming over to some relative safety?
So I couldn't get there myself, and then Bouwe and Kyle and Carlo came out, and I remember Bouwe saying to me, can I drag you? And like, yes. And they just dragged me across the deck. And then I think it was Kyle and Carlo that lifted me down into the bunk. And believe it or not, we'd actually practiced this scenario in our medical training, because Kyle, Carlo and myself were the medics that were being trained. And we'd done this exact scenario, I think, with me being the patient. So it was a little bit like we were rerunning our MSOS training. So, well done, Spike and all the team. It was perfect. But no, it was very hard in that condition for them to do it. And, it's amazing they managed to get me down flat. The thing is, of course, when you do the training, the idea is that you have a backboard and you're keeping the back straight, and you don't know what the injuries are. In reality, when you're underwater still going 20 something knots, then someone says, can I drag you off the deck? Yes. There's no other option. There's no time to get the backboard out.
So I'm just trying to understand. I mean, I haven't sailed with you, I don't think. I've sailed against you, way behind, as you're up near the front. But you do have a reputation for somebody who you are tough on the racetrack, and you do sports that require going, well, there's your pain barrier, but the victory's just above it. I'm trying to think about whether you were able to say, this one's bad, and I need to think about the longer game, and I'm going to stay in my bunk. Or was it a case of, I've got to get out of this bunk, I've got to get back on deck? What was the battle you were having?
Yeah, I think I was not a good patient, really. To begin with, I didn't have any option. I had to stay in the bunk. And I mean, straight away I was in the bunk, and then obviously they had to go and jibe. So I was kind of lying in the bunk waiting for probably 25, 30 minutes before the jibe was completed. And in that time, I could sort of tell that I was all right. I mean, as in, probably didn't have internal bleeding or didn't start feeling worse. So I had an injury, but the worry in the middle of the Southern Ocean is not just so much an injury, it's more, is there something more severe going on? And then KP came off watch and walked past my bunk and said, we're not even halfway through this leg yet, so you better come good soon. And, and he was right. And I really struggled to stay in my bunk after a few days. Yeah.
Was that something that KP, Bouwe, did they have to sort of put a hand on your shoulder and say, come on, rest up?
Yeah, I mean, Bouwe was definitely saying, you don't need to get back on deck, and making sure I didn't do anything stupid. But it's hard because no one actually knows what I've done.
Yeah.
By 4 days into being injured, I was sort of moving around, helping wherever I could really, bailing, making people cups of coffee. But it's really tough in that part of the race. We're driving along the ice gate and the guys were just knackered, watching them come off watch at night. And, when you're one person out of the watch system, that makes a big difference because suddenly people are just grinding or driving the whole time. So I suppose I just felt really guilty. It's freezing cold. It's awful being on deck anyway. And now people are having to put in longer hours because I'm injured. So, yeah, I really wanted to get back on deck, and I did go back on deck.
When you were incapacitated in your deck, in your bunk, sorry, I'm wondering, were they stacking you from side to side?
I mean, again, Bauer obviously said I didn't need to change for the jibes, but perhaps as you highlighted, me being me, I felt I did. And at least if I wasn't helping anyone, I didn't want to be a disadvantage by keeping my 75, 80 kilos at that point on the wrong side. So our poor OBR, I was pretty much forcing him to help me across the boat like an old granny in every single jibe. Yeah. His job changed. His job description changed during that leg.
Yeah, he's walking Zimmer frame. It's fine.
Well, when I went into hospital on Christmas Day in Melbourne, I felt very bad for that doctor. Christmas Day, the last things he wants is a stupid ocean race sailor broken themselves at sea on Christmas Day. And I came out of hospital and I was in a cast because it turned out not only had I hurt my back, broken my back, I'd also broken my foot in two places.
Sorry, hang on. Sorry, let me just rewind. You had broken your back?
Well, I'd broken a bone, the L1, So I got to the Christmas dinner that the team were having, and I told them I was going to hospital for a checkup, and obviously now I arrive with a cast and news that I've actually broken a bone in my back. At which point, I think they all thought I was pretty stupid for having got back on deck. Carlo's summary was probably the best, which I think he said, Lush, there's a thin line between tough and stupid, and you've crossed it.
Well, unfortunately, your loss, our gain, because you then came in and you did help us quite a bit in the office. You were there when we were doing the arrivals in The Hague. You were with me when we were commentating on that. What was that like? Because I quite like being in the commentary seat. It's quite an honour, but I'm guessing it wasn't the seat that you wanted.
I mean, for sure, it was really hard not to rejoin the race. I think, no one in sport is really a quitter, and you always want to stay with your team. But joining you in the commentary box now, there's definitely still a plus. And actually, it was such an exciting finish. I mean, it was a great place to watch it from. But I did get to work with Volvo and the team for the rest of the race, so it was great still to feel involved and be able to see everyone. I mean, so much of the ocean race is just this big family traveling around the world. So the biggest thing I felt, as well as not being in the sporting side of it when I was injured and was out, was also that I just kind of missed everyone. So it was great once the race got back to Europe to have the opportunity to kind of rejoin it, even from behind the screen.
Well, let's look ahead then to the next edition, because obviously the first thing that everyone wonders when one race wraps up is which one of these big stars are we going to see again in the next starting pack? And I understand that you're on the cards at the moment, Team Germany. You're with that team. Right now, nothing is too certain, but what's been the preparation so far for Team Germany? How close are you guys to the start line, do you think?
Yeah, Offshore Team Germany have been running for a while, and I actually got to sail with them last year. The skipper, Robert Staniak, I've known throughout my Olympic career. Actually, in fact, we've had quite parallel Olympic careers. So, I've known them a long time, and they put in a lot of work to get to the start line. So we're ready. We have a boat, we have a team, we have support, and in fact, just before sort of this global pandemic really came to the forefront, we were about to get into the next phase of training and getting the boat ready for the race.
And part of getting the boat ready for the race is, this is an IMOCA, and you were saying earlier that, the next jump is kitting it out with the foiling system.
Yeah, the boat we have is a refitted IMOCA, and yeah, the next step is definitely to put the foils on the boat, and the boat's currently in the UK, was about to be ready to do this. At the moment, of course, we don't know what's going to happen, and I think, we're very lucky that everyone from our team is safe and well, and obviously there's much bigger things going on at the moment, so we need to focus on those. But yeah, the next step for the IMOCAs will certainly be the foils.
Talk me through then sailing an IMOCA, because certainly from the limited video footage that we've seen of ex-ocean race teams going onto the IMOCAs, I mean, it couldn't be more different. I mean, let's start with the cockpit. It's a very different experience being in the cockpit of the 60 from the 65.
Yeah, I first got to go onto the 60 in Kiel, where we actually launched the boat and christened it Einstein. And we did a little bit of sailing, and I was grinding with Phil, who's one of our sailors and is a Finn sailor. And you realise that the two of you trying to fit even onto the grinder, just two people, is quite a challenge in that boat. Definitely designed for the smaller French sailors who were an offshore sailor.
But the canopy, I mean, is going to be such a big feature because, so two questions. One, if you come out on deck, do you need to actually wear your wet weather gear? And two, where on earth does the helm position themselves so that they've got a good view forward?
Well, very good questions. I mean, I think you can definitely help out in the pit without putting your wet weather gear on. So that's a big win. But of course, as everyone knows from offshore sailing, or as I learned in Team SCA, Sam Davies, Dee Ghaffari, you're going to be very happy to hear this. You always need to go out with your kit on, because you might be getting the pit ready, but then something might have gone wrong at the mast and someone's got to go up there. So if you're not ready, it's going to have happened. But it's definitely more comfortable with that nice big shield until you go to drive. And then we're in the middle of the fast net, sending it on the throw, on the fractional. Definitely need to drive, definitely can't be on the autopilot, waves, and yeah, trying to find a comfortable position to drive from, pretty hard.
And the speeds of the boats, I mean, obviously Offshore Team Germany at the moment it's a conventional setup, to, for want of a better term. The speed of the 60 compared to the 65, I mean, it's smaller.
Yeah, it's smaller, but it is so much lighter. And you just feel that the second you're on board. I mean, I don't know, somehow I knew the 65 was a bit of a monster. And even from the 70s, which were a monster as well, but the 65 was heavy for its size. It's for a good reason, because they were so robust. I mean, they're going to go 3 times around the world. I think it was incredible, but definitely heavy. And then you get on the 60 and it's just a different world. I mean, I was thinking, how are we going to sail something with so few people? And then you go to pick up a sail or try and hoist a sail, and hoisting the biggest sail is like hoisting the smallest sail on the 65. It's a lot lighter, so it requires less power to do things, and the acceleration is good.
The crew size is smaller than the 65, of course. We're talking about 5 people being on board with the 60, but the space down below, is it going to be a case of, I mean, there's hot bunking and then there's doubling up in actual physical space. How much room do you have down there to breathe?
Yeah, it's really not very big down there. And
because one of the things as well that somebody pointed out to me not long ago is, of course, if you've got 5 people on board, you're having to take 5 people's provisions, water, kit and everything. So it's not just 5 people, it's 5 people's luggage.
Yeah, this is true now, but also remember that we don't stop anywhere, hopefully, for dinner. So there will always be a minimum of 2 people on deck. So the maximum amount of kit below and people would probably be 3 at any one time. But even so, there is not much space. And I suppose, it'd be interesting to see how people sort of refit the below. This is not a one design, so you can do what you want, and it's going to be, I'm sure, some creative solutions to that of how to stack people and kit. Certainly on our boat currently, even to get to the single bunk that there is, you can't be fin sized. You just kind of have to like post your shoulders through to crawl into this hole. So there might be some modifications on our boat for sure.
A lighter boat then, as you say, the 65 is heavy for a reason. 3 times it's going to go around the planet. And I think it's quite remarkable as well, when you look back at the 65, especially the conditions of the last edition, that the boats really did hold up well. When you're sailing the 60, do you get a sense that some of the stabilizers have been removed? There's a little bit less armor plating between you and the danger.
So I mean, this is probably going to, for me, I think this is going to be the biggest question, the biggest kind of edge of the design, because on the one hand, you have got people sailing these boats around the world single-handed, but obviously that's at quite a different intensity to how you can sail when you're fully crewed. And these ocean races, they're sort of animals, so they're going to push these things pretty hard. So then you've got a lot of decisions to make about how robust you're going to make your boat and how much weight you're going to add to do that. And we were talking about foils, and this is definitely something to think about in terms of foils. I mean, how extreme do you want to go? And on the other hand, also to win the race, you've got to get round. So this is going to be, I think, the crux of the race.
It's going to demand quite a bit, as does every edition, on the teams. I remember something that you said to me when we were in The Hague, and we were talking about the female rule at the time. And I remember you said something, and it really stuck with me, where I was talking about, the strength on board the boat. And you said no one's going to pick Andrew Cape as a grinder, but you'd pick him because he brings something else to the teams. I'm paraphrasing. You said it better.
Cape, I didn't say it like that.
Yeah. Maybe he is a good grinder. Who knows? But I think that's a really good point, actually, is I think from a spectator point of view, we just think of powerhouses. And I'm sure you've got to be resilient and strong. You've got to be able to contribute. But with any of the teams that are coming into this, let's say with the IMOCA, are you trying to pick 5 clones? Are you trying to pick, well, you're going to have this, you're going to have this? I mean, when you are sort of imagining the future, how does that perfect team that we're all desperately trying to get to, how does it look?
I mean, I think in offshore sailing as a whole, it demands a more rounded sailor. I mean, anyway, but for sure with the IMOCA, you don't want clones. You definitely need some sort of navigation specialism, which I certainly don't have, and and you need certain specialities, but you will need people who can trim and drive. I mean, it's the thing that struck me the most on the Fastnet. Well, no, probably 2 things. One was, I think like everybody, we always say, I don't know if I'm going to do this again. I don't know if I'm going to do this race again. I don't know if I'm going to do the Olympics again. And then I stepped on the 60. I mean, the first time we'd sailed it, we don't have any foils yet. And I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. So that was one thing. But the next thing was just how completely exhausted it was after the Fastnet and how short-handed it felt. And it is, because 5 is, especially if one person goes injured or is sick or is down, I mean, you feel so short-handed. And suddenly if you need to be driving, depending on exactly how it works with autopilots and everything, but you're going to have to drive a lot, and then you feel very short-handed. So yeah, people are going to need to be pretty well-rounded. And in terms of strength, it's not how much you can lift, it's a different kind of strength.
Yeah, the strength that you need when you're cold and tired and seasick, definitely not the strength that I have. Lastly then, final question. There's your shape of your team. You've got your 5 individuals. For a team that's going to have you in it, as somebody that's had some success, had some highs, had some lows, had some times where, as you were described, where you're in your bunk and you're just wishing that, you could get back out, but, everything's against you. What would you say to your team? You say, look, I'm Annie Lush. When I'm down, when I'm hurt, when I'm homesick, when I'm tired, when I'm cold, what would you say? What's the simplest way that someone can go, I've got you a little something, a little treat? What's your go-to? I'm back in the game. Thanks very much for that. Is it a word? Is it a food? Is it a what?
We're on 100% of the numbers.
Oh. Performance driven.
Well, yeah, I think for me, if we know that that also means you're getting, to the finish quickly. But yeah, no, I mean, I think if you know that the boat's going well, then yeah, you can relax, and that's what we're out there to do. So yeah, I think the thing I loved the most in Team SCA, looking back on it, was I was working with Justine Metro as a trimmer. It was such a big challenge for us in that race because we really started without much knowledge. I mean, we'd been coached, but we just hadn't been out there, and there's so many different conditions. Something that I think a lot of Olympic sailors maybe don't appreciate is that I'd spent 10 years of my life learning to be very fast upwind and downwind. I mean, they'd even gotten rid of reaching within my first year of Olympic sailing. The trapezoid courses had gone. Suddenly, to go around the world, you need to sail every single angle, in every single wind condition, in every single wave condition. Well, I haven't really done that before. So a lot of us hadn't. So that takes a lot of time, and that's a lot of different skills to learn. And I remember working with Justine in SCA, and the point that we sort of like through the race could just tick off those angles and those conditions that we could get to 100% on. It was amazing, and just being able to work through that process, that felt like such a win. And that was definitely what kept me going through that race, just knowing that slowly but surely we were ticking those off.
I mean, I'm guessing that's why you're where you are and I'm where I am, because for me it would just be a Kit Kat, and then I'd be fine.
I can't deny the benefits of a Kit Kat junkie. You're absolutely right there, Niall. But
there we go. Now you're being honest.
But you've really got to watch out, because at the equator, all the chocolate, when you peel off the wrapper, is on the wrapper, and it's so disappointing.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in the Southern Ocean, it's so solid you can't break it. So there's a window for the Kit Kat junkie in that race.
Well, that's fine, because I'd eat them all in the first couple of days. When we leave the dock, I'll be so seasick, so depressed to be out there. That's fine. Annie, thank you very much. I really hope that we see more people being nurtured into the race, more young people, by yourself and by the Magenta Project, and we get another chance to see you take another lap of the planet on the 60. That would be pretty good.
Thank you. Well, I hope we one day now we say this and there's more girls than boys out there, but we'll see how we go.
All right. Thank you very much. Oh, I hope you enjoyed that interview. Fascinating to get an insight as to what it takes to be pushing hard for speed in the Southern Ocean and indeed around the entire racetrack. If you enjoyed this interview, subscribe for more. We've got plenty more coming in the next few weeks, and you can leave us a suggestion as to who you want us to interview next, plus any questions that you want answers to. See you next time.